Good morning and a warm welcome to today's webinar, Managing Mental Health During These Challenging Times. My name's Susie and I'm delighted to be facilitating this session today. It's the sixth in a series of webinars from This Can Happen, and it's aiming to support you and your colleagues and families with a series of webinars. As a lot of you will know, this session has been rearranged from 4 weeks ago when David, our speaker, was struck down with coronavirus. So welcome back, David. We're glad you're back on form and we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Susie.
So just quickly, I'm just going to talk through how this webinar is going to work for those who might not have participated before. So David Beanie is going to talk to you for about 50 minutes and you'll be able to follow along on your screen. So don't worry if you missed anything today. I know we've all got loads of distractions at home, which we might not usually have, like children and other things. You will be receiving a copy of the slides and recording of the session by email, which you should get within the next 24 hours. So you can ask a question at any time during this session, and we really do encourage you to do so. The more interactive, the better. All you need to do is type it into the question box, which you'll see on the right hand side of your screen. Questions are totally anonymous and they only come to my screen, so please do feel free to contribute in complete confidence. I know that David's planning on asking you some questions as he goes along for you to put the answers into the question box, so as I say, please do contribute. Okay, that is absolutely enough from me at the moment. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to your guest speaker today, David Beanie.
Thank you so much, Susie, and everybody. It's great to be back. Sorry I wasn't able to do this a month ago. I am still coughing a little bit from the coronavirus, so hopefully I won't cough through too much of this today. Just out of interest, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do today in the chat box is can you just give a score out of 10 to how you're feeling today? Don't worry, we're not going to come back to any of you and ask you why you scored, what you're going to score. We're just interested in the range of scores. While you're doing that, I'll just go through what I see as the objectives from this webinar. Number one, we're going to look at ways to improve our own mental health and resilience to cope with exceptionally challenging times, both at work and at home. It's never so important during this pandemic to really focus on our own mental well-being. I'm going to be looking at that today. We're also going to look at the best ways to stay emotionally connected with your teams now they're working remotely and how to keep them engaged. We're going to give you hints and tips to have a productive and enjoyable day when working from home. And we're also going to give you specific advice how to protect your mental health during this coronavirus. So Susie, can I just ask, did anyone put some scores in the chat function? What sort of range are we looking at today?
Okay, so we've had loads of responses, so thank you everybody. We've got a lot of 7s, a lot of 8s, a couple of 9s, 6 more. Oh look, someone said that they feel empowered and inspired. 6 is, I'd say 7 is about your average, 8, 9 and 1, 4, but mostly okay. 7 and 8. Oh, and a 5. Oh, tired. Someone says tired. I hear you.
So we've, right, okay, thanks, Susie. We've got some 4 to 9 then. Thanks everybody for doing that. Right, a little bit about me for people who don't know me. I'm engaged to the lovely Lisa. I am meant to be on honeymoon at the moment, but we won't go there this morning. We've got 3 grown-up kids between us, Joel, Jodie and my stepdaughter Casey. I also became a granddad for the first time in March, but as you can imagine, I've only seen him twice, I think, because of this lockdown. And I live in Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire. I spent over 30 odd years working in media, having a relatively normal career. But I was hiding a dark secret. But my whole life changed forever on the 16th of May, 2016. And because I outed myself about my mental health. I even didn't realize myself how much I was keeping it quiet from absolutely everybody in my life. My ex-wife of 28 years, my mates down the pub, and nobody I worked with had any idea that I was suffering with poor mental health. But it really has changed my life. In the early days, I just started sharing my mental health story, but I realized it wasn't enough to do that. I got too many emails from people contacting me saying, David, it's great that you've shared your mental health story with us today, and I've really resonated with it. But I'm going to be really honest with you. I would never share with my employer my true mental health because I think it would have a negative impact on my career. So I realized that where my work lay was in culture and helping organizations to create kinder cultures in the workplace. So I established my business, Breaking the Silence, and I've been very lucky for the last few years to work with many of the leading brands around the country in helping them to create cultures in the workplace where people feel safe to talk openly about their mental health. I know a number of companies have done some great work taking on mental health first aiders and wellbeing champions, but it's really been proven if you do that in isolation, it doesn't really work. This is really a cultural piece, and it's all about kindness. And referring specifically to the pandemic going on at the moment, it certainly has never ever been so important to really create kind emotional relationships with your employees. But we're going to be talking a lot about that today. I'm sharing with Susie, who I'd spoken to for the first time this morning, who's facilitating this webinar, about I spent 30 odd years battling with panic attacks, and I still do. Before every single one of these talks or webinars, I have a real moment and I think to myself, it's going to be really embarrassing today if I become completely breathless while speaking to you to all on this webinar this morning. So naturally people say to me, how do you avoid having a panic attack? When I was first asked that question, I didn't know the answer. I used to say to people, there's a phrase we associate with mental health that it's okay not to be okay. And perhaps I've truly embraced that, but I knew it wasn't the answer. And then I started to realize that you inspire people when you share vulnerability. And because the more and more I did this, I just got some lovely feedback. And I knew that I was making it easier for people to open up about their mental well-being by me sharing my story. I'm going to talk again a bit later on this webinar about the importance at the moment of sharing how you really are to inspire others. But I still knew it wasn't the answer. I never thought I'd find the cure, and cure is a really good word to use because I will never, ever, ever be cured. And what I've realized happens is that when I suddenly have a moment where I think I'm going to have a panic attack, I say to myself, well, have one. Share with you this morning on this webinar what it actually sounds like. Share with you what it actually feels like to be having a panic attack. By allowing myself to have one, I'm being kind to myself and I'm showing myself compassion. So I believe the reason I now largely avoid panic attacks is I've discovered what they call self-compassion, which is all about being kinder to yourself. And again, linking back to the pandemic at the moment, we're all going to be feeling a lot more anxious than we would be normally. And for some of us, that may lead to panic attacks. Really try and be kind to yourself and try and, not put yourself under so much pressure to get everything right at the moment, to be so perfect. Because when you take the pressure off of yourself to be perfect, you actually bring your anxiety levels down. But again, I'm going to be talking more on this webinar today about the importance of being kind to yourself. The first time I ever put a deck together on mental health, I sent it out to a few people and I said to them, can you be really honest about my slides? And they all said exactly the same thing. They said to me, you haven't got any statistics in there. And I said to them, look, take this in the right spirit, but every statistic I've ever read about mental health is complete bullshit. I said, no one knew about me for 36 years. And I've been proved right in many ways because I've had thousands of emails now from people saying to me, I could never share with my employer the truth about my mental health because it would have a negative impact on my career. It's also a sad statistic that 4 out of 10 suicides come as a complete shock to family and friends. And supposedly, still, for every 20 employees who dial into work with mental health issues, only one tells the truth. The rest of you would rather say that you've got diarrhea or migraine, problems with transport, problems with kids. So I've never believed in this statistic 1 in 4. I've always believed it's 1 in 1. I think we've all got health, both physical and mental. And at some stage every year, our physical health could be better. And at the same time, our mental health could be better. I'm sure a number of you listening to this webinar this morning didn't get a great night's sleep last night. You may have woken up a few times or woken up this morning quite early and not been able to get back to sleep. I'm sure that some of you at the moment are having days where your energy is quite low and you're struggling to get yourself going working from home. I'm sure that some of you at the moment are struggling to concentrate at times because you've got a lot going on in your mind. There'll be days when you're worried about one of the children, you'll be worried about mum or dad, you'll be worried about your partner, you'll be worried about finances, you'll be worried about health, you'll be worried about the viability of your job moving forward, and you'll be struggling to concentrate. Well, everything I've just talked about there is poor mental health. We've got this perception in the UK that you've only got poor mental health when you're diagnosed with depression or you're diagnosed with anxiety. Well, you don't need to be diagnosed from a professional to have poor mental health. We all have health, both physical and mental, and we've got to start realizing that every single one of us during this pandemic and every single one of us every year at some stage will struggle with your mental health. And when we start thinking one in one, by the way, we destigmatize this subject and we make it easier for everybody to talk about. So let's start realizing that we've all got health, both physical and mental, and it makes it easier for people to talk about it. I went through my phone recently, and I say this with a sense of fun, but I wanted to work out how many of my friends had a personal trainer, and I counted 7. And why do I know they have a personal trainer? It's because they can't shut up about it. In contrast, I wonder how many of my friends have got a personal trainer for the mind. I wouldn't know, would I? Because that sort of personal trainer is called a counsellor or a therapist, and it's too embarrassing to talk about. What's more important, I ask you, and you don't need to write this in the chat function, is it about looking after your mind, or is it about having bingo wings? I think we know. Part of the problem is we don't like the meaning of the word mental anymore. It's become a very negative term, and I'll explain what I mean by that. If you type into Google Images physical health, the last time I did that, I saw images of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Usain Bolt, Cristiano Ronaldo, and every image was of an athletic body. In contrast, if you type into Google Images mental health, every image is negative. Every image is of people holding their heads in their hands. Why? Why is mental health seen as so negative, yet physical health is so positive? In there lies part of the reason why you don't like to associate with the word mental health, but just see it as the health of your mind. Because I think we've changed the meaning of the word mental, and we'll probably never go back again. But again, summary of that little chat there, we've all got health, both physical and mental. Every single one of us is going to struggle with our mental health at some stage. And if we share it with others, it just gets easier for everybody to talk about it. Right, moving on. So at the moment, it's really, really important that you're looking after yourself more than at any time you've ever looked after yourself before. During this pandemic, it is absolutely critical that all of you do things to look after your own resilience. So while I'm just talking about this, I want you to type in the chat function some of the things that you've been doing while working from home to look after your mental health. I run workshops regularly, and one of the most popular breakout groups is what do you do to become mentally fitter? So that's given me a lot of insight, which I'm going to share with you now. And interestingly, it's really straightforward stuff. The most common answer I get, or the most common 2 answers I get about looking after your mental health, number 1 is sleep. Sleep is so important to your well-being, and it's really important you try and regulate your sleep. We've all been to bed late at night worried about something, had a good night's sleep and woken up the next morning and felt in a much better place. It's because sleep is really good for you. When you get yourself tired, you do seem to see things in a slightly darker mood. And the other really answer right up there is physical health. Governments around the world have, despite these stricter instructions around lockdown, they've been very keen to encourage everybody to take physical health exercise every day. And that's because it's recognized that physical health is really closely related to your mental health. Now, to some of you, that's going out and running 10K every day. But for others, it's just, walking around the garden and getting some fresh air and some exercise. But it's really important at the moment that we do get good quality sleep and we get regular exercise. It's also really important to have me time. Me time is so important. The most important person in the world to love, this may sound a bit bit freakish, but it's not your kids. It's not mum or dad. It's not your partner. The most important person in the world to love is you. You've all heard when you've been on an airplane, if the oxygen mask come down and you've got kids with you, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Because if you look after yourself, you're then in a situation to look after others around you. So I really, really encourage you at the moment to be selfish and to put yourself first. I was working with a guy a few years ago, and he found his career really easy. He was very successful at work and nothing ever fazed him. However, for the first time in his life, he felt he was failing. And what he felt he was failing at was being a dad. He'd just become a dad for the first time, and he didn't think he was doing a very good job. Now, because he was a busy guy, when he knew he needed to create more time to look after the baby and to support mum. So he did three things. He gave up his Arsenal season ticket, he stopped running, and he stopped car rallying. And I got to work with this guy, and we realized within a few months that he probably developed postnatal depression because he'd stopped looking after himself. I still work with this guy. In fact, I've actually got a session with him this afternoon. We got him back to going to watch Arsenal again. Some people may think that's not a good thing, but no, we got him back to going to watch Arsenal again. We got him running again, and we got him car rallying again. And within a few months, he was in a much better place. And he was no longer a grumpy dad. He was no longer a grumpy husband. He was in his own mind, doing a really good job. And he's now in a really good place. He's now got another child as well. But I always tell that story because what he got wrong, he stopped looking after himself. It is so important that all of you at the moment have me time, even if it feels selfish, because if you really want to love and support people around you at the moment, you've got to look after yourself first. Another lovely story I like to share about looking after your well-being, and like lots of great stories, they come from children. Now, children throughout the land, they have playtime in between their lessons at school. And we often forget why we give children playtime. We give kids playtime for 4 reasons. One is because it's a break between 2 pieces of work to re-energize them. Secondly, it's fresh air and hopefully sunshine. Thirdly, it's social interaction. And the last one is it's some degree of physical exercise. And in a school last year in the UK, one of the kids suggested to the teacher that the teachers should have playtime. So what was brilliant in that school, a few weeks later, they had a role reversal and all the teachers had to have playtime. They were told without exception by the head, you're going out into the playground. And all the kids were told, you've got to stay in the classroom. And you know what kids are like? They thought it was the best playtime ever. They really, really looked forward to it. And when that playtime came, they all rushed to get the best vantage points. But they were left really disappointed because the adults went out into the playground because they had to, but they stood there looking fairly bored. Dare I say it, some of them on their mobile phones. Now, what the kids wanted to see was the adults running around the playground, chasing each other, having fun. So they were left really disappointed. And the reason I share this story with you this morning is, when we become adults, we need playtime just as much as kids need playtime. And I'm going to suggest to you that a lot of you on the webinar this morning, you're not having playtime. You're not giving yourself a break between 2 pieces of work to re-energize yourself. You're not getting sufficient social interaction. You're not getting enough fresh air and sunshine, and you're not getting enough physical exercise. When we become adults, we need playtime as much as we needed playtime when we went to school. Playtime to some of you will be different to others of you, but we all definitely need playtime. Other things that will come up on this list is like just sort of doing fun things, giving yourself things to look forward to, surrounding yourself with people who make you laugh, giving yourself treats, giving yourself things to look forward to. I know there's a lot of uncertainty out there at the moment, but it's still important that we plan for the future. Lisa and I were due to get married last Monday, and that was a really difficult day for us because sod's law, the weather was gorgeous, and we kept thinking we should be getting married today. So what we did last Monday, we decided on that day to book the wedding for next year because it is going to happen. We've still got each other, and it's given us a specific date again to look forward to. So I encourage all of you again, still give your things to look forward to, despite the level of uncertainty out there at the moment. Susie, can I ask, is anyone written in the chat box about things that they've been doing during the lockdown to look after their mental health at all?
Yes, millions of people, millions. I'm obviously exaggerating. Let me just whip through some of them. So we've had a lot of meditation and a lot of working out, but also lovely things like crafting, walking the dog, eating well, going for runs, yoga classes, Skype, using that really good app, Headspace, fixing things. That's great, isn't it? Bird watching.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, reading puzzles. It's great. Thank you so much, everybody. Sitting in the garden, nature. You know, it's all very. Oh, that's frequent naps. I thought they said maps. Yeah, no, it's all good. People seem to be on it. It's good.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to move on now. I'm asked very regularly about what are the signs to look for when a family member, friend, or work colleague may be suffering with poor mental health. Because we all at this time, we're very worried about loved ones, friends, people at work, because everyone's going through this, but to some degree in their own unique way. And you know, we haven't got time now, but if I asked you to write in the chat function the signs you might look for, you will come up with a list of at least 100 different things. What I'm going to suggest to you this morning is to keep it simple for you in your mind. You're looking for any change in behavior whatsoever. Any change out of the ordinary of someone who's suddenly a lot sillier, someone whose energy levels really go down, someone who's not picking up the phone, someone who's a bit more argumentative. You are looking for any change in behavior whatsoever. Now, we're often good at looking for the signs because we worry about our friends and families and colleagues, etc. But often we don't know what to say. It's really difficult to start that conversation. So what I'm going to suggest to you now is you, because we're very worried about being judgmental. I'm a qualified mental health counsellor. Now we're trained to notice, not interpret, because when you try and interpret a situation, that's when you can be very guilty of judging. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that you are allowed to call out a change in behaviour because you're being factual. So for example, if Susie, who's on, facilitating this webinar today, if Susie was normally really mild-mannered and calm, and all of a sudden she was biting my head off, it's okay for me to say to Susie, hope you don't mind me saying this, but just recently you've become really short-tempered and really snappy. Are you okay? Because I'm calling out a change in behaviour that I've noticed. I'm not judging. I'm not trying to suggest why she's doing it. I've noticed it and I'm calling it out. So as I said, I'm asked this question a lot about what signs do you look for? You're looking for any change in behaviour. And then I'm asked, how do you start that conversation? Generally, as part of a wider conversation, you call out that change in behaviour, whatever it is, and then you say to them, are you okay? I'll come back a bit more into the language you use around that a little bit later on this webinar. Anyone who's seen me before will know that I believe that the stigma of mental health is the whole wall of silence around the subject. We find it really difficult to talk about mental health because we don't feel qualified. We don't know how to start conversations. And also the stigma of mental health isn't a workplace stigma. It's a society-based stigma that's so deep that we bring it into the workplace. So rather than give you a workplace example today, I'll give you an example outside of the workplace. A friend of mine came up to me in mid-January of last year and said, I'm really worried about my son. Basically, he was disappearing after mealtimes at Christmas, and he's regularly disappeared after mealtimes since. And when he was a teenager, he went through a phase of pretending to eat. And he said, look, me and his mum, we're struggling to sleep. We're really, really worried about him. Can you put your mental health counsellor's hat on and advise us what we need to do? So I said to him, Steve, this is what you need to do. You sit him down and you say to Paul, Paul, me and your mum really love you. Now, we've noticed recently that you've been disappearing after mealtimes. Are you okay? And Steve looked at me and said, do you mean I talked to him? And I said, yeah. I said, if he was walking around the house with a limp, you'd say to him straight away if you've got a bad leg. If he was walking around the house holding his belly, you'd say, have you got a stomachache? But because it's mental health, you can't even talk to your own son. I said, Steve, it's already a month since Christmas. You know, you can talk to him. And we just got to get better at talking about mental health. I got off an airplane last year I was flying up to Edinburgh for the day. And when I got off the plane, I did what we all do. I turned my phone on, and 4 texts had come through to me. So my phone was pinging away. And at the time, I had a bad leg. I was walking with a little bit of a limp, but it was only a bad leg. It was only a knee injury through playing squash. And all of these texts were asking me how my knee was, which was lovely. It was very supportive of my friends to check in with me about my knee. But it made me realise that in that hour on the flight from London to Edinburgh, I'd had 4 texts about my knee. And I thought to myself, how many texts have I had in my life about my mental health? Not one in 50 odd years. Not that there was text around 20 plus years ago, but you know the point I'm making. We really struggle to talk about this subject. So again, one of my key messages today is going to come out a lot. We've got to get better at talking about this subject in exactly the same way that we talk about physical health. I'm going to move on now to talking about how do we keep our remote workers engaged and energized. And get me, hey, I was invited onto BBC Radio 5 Live earlier in the week to talk about this very subject. So I'm going to share with you what I was saying to the listeners of Radio 5 earlier this week. The first thing, and I think it's the most important, employees must feel at the moment that your priority as an employer is their well-being and not the needs of the business. I absolutely accept that for some very task-focused business people, it's really difficult for them to accept when they're really struggling to keep their business going. But when they first contact an employee at the moment, that what's got to come across is that the priority is the well-being needs of that employee. But that's the critical way of keeping employees engaged. So I'm going to give you 2 real examples that I heard of only last week of what let's call it best practice and worst practice. Somebody sent me an email that they'd had from their boss, and the email was absolutely smacked of distrust. It was all about the needs of the business. There was no real empathy with what that person was going through. And there was even a reference in the email to we've actually got technology that can check how much you're logging on and working at the moment. And this person was left very, very unhappy by the email, and was certainly not engaged and not really motivated to work for that employer that day. On the same day, another employee contacted me and said he just got off the phone to his boss. And he said that his boss was truly inspirational, and that if his boss asked him now to work for the next 3 months without pay, he would willingly do so to protect the viability of the business. And I said to him, how was your boss that inspirational to make you feel like that? And he said, because he rang up and he was just totally interested in the well-being of me and my family. We hardly spoke about work at all. He just wanted to make sure that me and my family were okay. And this guy was so motivated to work for that employer because the employer was focusing on that person's well-being. The second one is we need to increase communication at the moment. And obviously the tone, as I've just said, really must display trust. I'm hearing at the moment from some employees that they're hardly hearing from their employers at all. Depending on the size of your team, they almost want to hear from you every day at the moment. Now, if you're getting the tone right and the messaging right, it doesn't feel like you're checking up on them. But people working remotely, they want more communication, not less communication than when they were working within the office. The third one, and I've already referred to this earlier today, but senior people have got to start sharing their own vulnerabilities. It's not weakness. It's evidence-based now that senior people are more likely to lose their job if they don't show those human moments and don't share their own vulnerabilities. During this pandemic, there won't be any senior leader who's not going to have the odd bad day, who themselves is going to sort of be worried about the future. We've got this very much British stiff upper lip that it's weakness to show, your own vulnerabilities. Trust me, you inspire people when you share how you're really feeling. It's not a weakness. What you're doing, you're giving other people permission to share how they're really feeling. So you've already heard this at least twice today. Hopefully it's one of those key messages coming through. We've got to start sharing our vulnerability because we'll inspire people around us. And the last one, again, you've already heard from me, but I put it in here because it's one of the key things. Everyone needs to be kind to themselves at the moment, as this will build resilience during tough times. You've got to put yourselves first. I'm going to come on again in a minute about some of the things that you can do to really be kinder to yourself while working from home and during this pandemic. So just for the managers on the call today, just some tips for you. On every single call that you make at the moment, you should be starting those conversations with asking people how they are. But really critically, you need to be listening non-judgmentally before you ask about work. That's it, Susie. I'm allowed to share this story from HSBC Bank. They, a few years ago, they commissioned the biggest ever wellbeing survey undertaken. And they asked 76,000 employees a question that was, are HSBC interested in your well-being, yes or no? It was a very black and white question. It was part of a much wider survey, but they were quite shocked by the answer. They asked that question because they've got one of the best reputations in the world around well-being, and they still do have. They were shocked with the answer because 36,000 employees, 38,000 employees said no. 50% of the workforce said this company doesn't care about me. They were naturally disappointed with that. And because they care so much about well-being, they immediately set about trying to understand what this survey was saying. And so they drilled into the data to find the common denominator. And they found that common denominator. It won't surprise you, it was the line manager. And then they drilled further into the data to see what is that manager doing or not doing to make you think this company doesn't care about you. And it was really basic stuff. Number one was in your one-to-one meetings, those managers were saying, they were going straight into talking about work. They were talking about KPIs and customers and objectives and strategy, as opposed to simply saying, before we get into this today, how are you? How's the family? And really listening. Now that was a few years ago now, well before this pandemic. Well, that's become even more important to do that now. So my suggestion is every single call to a colleague should start with, how are you? And really listening. The second one on here, just a tip again, and we covered it on the previous slide, just get the tone right at the moment. Really try to be empathic with what people are going through and try and trust people. A lot of businesses were very reticent before the pandemic to let their workers work from home because they didn't really trust them to do so. Well, I heard last week a great story. Dow Jones, I believe that they're saying to their employees every day, you can take 2 hours out during the working day every day to look after the needs of your household and your family, because they believe that if you're working from home and you're very focused, within 5.5 hours, you can achieve as much in that time as if you were doing 7 hours in the office. And I think that was a really kind gesture to do, which is landing really well with their employees. And with the irony being, again, I bet a lot of those employees are doing a lot more than 5 hours a day because they've been inspired and engaged by their employer in the right way during this pandemic. I won't name the employer here, but because this is it's something that came from the right place, but it backfired. But the managing director of one company, he sent out an email to all staff saying, I've got a great idea about when you're working from home. I want you roughly in the middle of the day to have a power hour. He said, during that hour, I want you to maybe get some exercise, maybe get some fresh air, treat yourself, perhaps have a really nice bit of lunch, etc., etc. And I'm sure it came from the right place, but we got lots of emails back straight away saying, don't you mean take a lunch break? And I'm sure he meant well by it, but possibly They've forgotten that people are entitled to take an hour during the day in most businesses to eat and to get exercise and to have social interaction. So again, just at the moment, make sure all communication is empathic and displays trust. The third one is thinking about the language you use when asking people about their well-being. This may surprise you because I've said today we've got to get better at talking about mental health. The worst thing I could say to any of you is, how's your mental health today? Because of the stigma with that word, we tend to go into shutdown mode. We find it far too invasive and people tend to clam up. So what we're finding in the world of mental health, and particularly in the workplace, everybody understands the universal language of 1 to 10. We all know that 7 out of 10 is okay. We know 8 or 9 is really good. And we know that anything like 3s and 4s and 5s isn't particularly good. And if you do this on a consistent basis, it also enables you to look for change. So for example, if you know your employees well, and you knew that Susie always scored an 8 and Robert always scored a 6, if Susie one day even went down to a 7, but definitely if Susie went from a normal 8 to a 6, not in a team environment, but on a one-to-one basis, you could say to Susie, Susie, I noticed today you're only a 6. Do you mind me asking what's dragged you down to a 6? And she might tell you because you're not asking about her mental health. I suggest that when you ask people out of 10, you certainly don't say, give me a score out of 10 for your mental health. You can simply say to people, give me a score out of 10. You can say, give me a score for your energy today. Or you can just say, give me a score for how you're feeling. And it's just a good way of opening up a well-being conversation without actually referring to somebody's mental health. And the last one on here is simply try and speak to, depending on the size of your team, try and speak to employees every day. And just remember, not all conversations have to be about work at all. A very brilliant Japanese CEO who was running one of the most successful businesses in Japan, he was asked a number of years ago, how do you run a hugely successful organization? If you were going to leave us with one golden nugget, what would that be? And I always remember, he said, I've got about 8 direct reports. I try and speak to them all every other day, but only half of those conversations might be about work. Now, this was probably 10 years ago. A lot of people in the room that day felt very shortchanged by his answer, but the rest of us thought that is fantastic. This senior leader has realized the value of employee engagement and getting the really best out of people. So again, depending on the size of your teams, try and speak to your colleagues every day, but just remember, all the conversations don't need to even mention work at times. Just moving on, just looking at some hints and tips to help those working from home. Leave the house, even if you're standing on your doorstep or the garden. Think about my playtime. It's really important to energize yourself and to get fresh air. While I had the coronavirus, by the way, moving on to number 2, I was quarantined in one room for 21 days. And I found I even moved around that room during the day just to re-energize myself. It was my bedroom, and I've got a desk and chair in the bedroom. So I'd spend an hour or so sitting at my desk, and then I'd take the laptop and sit on the bed for a while. Then I'd go back to my desk for a while. But for all of those you working from home at the moment, move around the house. If you've got one little place you sit and work at all day, it's not good for you. You'll find you'll energize yourself if you move from the kitchen to the lounge to the office. I totally respect, by the way, you may have other members in the family who you may have to negotiate that with. So I appreciate it's not always as easy as you think. Equally, number 3, put some boundaries around your work. I think it's important, if you can, to have real structure to your day. It's important to stay right. I'm going to start work at 9 o'clock, and then I'm going to take a break at this time, and then have lunch at this time. And I'm definitely going to shut down my laptop at this time. I got a real lecture from my fiance Lisa last night because she's realized this week that I haven't been taking any breaks. When it was sunny last week, for some reason I found time to go out into the garden for a coffee. But she's realized this week I've just sort of got on with my day and I'm not practicing what I preach. And number 4, stay focused and switch off distractions. I love cats, and we've got two gorgeous cats here. And I've got to shut the door of the room I'm in because the cats keep coming in and they distract me. Yeah, try and stay focused and switch off any distractions. Number 5, social interaction is so important. If you worked out when you were working in an office, if you were, how much time in a day you spend socially interacting, and all of a sudden you might be on your own at home. It's really important to keep that social interaction going for your well-being. And the last one is possibly the most important, number 6. I believe that every human being is a unique individual. So you need to know what you need to do to have a good day. You know yourself better than anybody else at all. So put into a day what you need to have a good day, and you'll know what I mean by that. So just moving on to the last list I've got on here. It's suggestions to protect your own mental health during the coronavirus itself. Number 1, limit the time you spend watching things which aren't making you feel better. At the start of this pandemic, I had the news on all day long. I was fixated on it. And I've realised it started to really drag me down. So I now just watch the news once a day, which is the second point on here. Just perhaps decide on specific times in a day to check the news. Number 3, I think we're all aware of this new term, fake news. I'll admit, I'm quite a big user of Facebook, and I've had to switch certain people off who are really into certain conspiracy theories, or they take information from untrusted sources that end up worrying me. So I think it's really important that you stay informed from trusted sources of information at the moment. And number 4, for those of you into Twitter and so on, it's important again at the moment to mute keywords which may be triggering you to read and see things that aren't going to do your well-being any good. Again, number 5, lots of us are in WhatsApp groups. Again, I'll put Facebook on there because it plays a big part in our lives, but sometimes at the moment there's so much going on there, it's just too overwhelming. People are putting on so many videos that are meant to make you laugh, but sometimes if you're not in a great place, they don't make you laugh, or there's just too much going on. So just mute WhatsApp groups and come off of them. But equally, number 6, I'm not saying don't stay connected with people. As I say, it's so important. And number 7, I think we all hoped at the beginning of this pandemic that we'd have a couple of weeks of lockdown and we'd all go back to normal. I think we've realised that this is going to drag on for some time before we ever go back to some sort of normality. So it's really important to have downtime and not to have burnout at the moment. And the last one on here is we talked about it already today. It's the importance of getting exercise and eating and staying hydrated. So just looking at the next slide, who can we talk to in confidence? Most of your employers have employee assistance programs. Before this pandemic, the average use of them nationally was under 3%. So many of us just don't feel comfortable talking to someone on the end of a phone who we don't know about how we're really feeling. But there's never been such an important time to use your employee assistance programs. And I know that this can happen very attached to the charity Mental Health UK. So reach out at the moment. Don't suffer in silence. It's really important that you talk to somebody. And outside of what we've got on here, try and talk to your partner. Try and talk to a best friend. You can still contact your GP despite the lockdown. You can still contact mental health counsellors. I said earlier today, I'm a mental health counsellor, and at the moment I'm busier than ever, but I've switched my counselling to either Skype or voice calls if people aren't comfortable with video. But it's really important at the moment that people reach out to speak to someone. Please don't suffer in silence. And my final slide before we open it up to questions simply reads a little more conversation. I do think that some employers are complicating this subject. This isn't about training up loads of people on mental health. This is all about just checking in with each other more than we've ever checked in with each other before. As I said earlier, it's about starting any team calls or Zooms calls or whatever you're going on with just everyone checking in and just saying how they are. It's about whenever you contact any colleagues at the moment, before you get into the work stuff, again, just check in with each other. So that concludes, Susie, the formal part of my chat today. I know that we've got 574 of you are listening here at the moment. So please, we can't answer all your questions, but I'm certainly happy at the end of here to give people my email address. If any of you, we don't get to deal with your questions today, I'm David Beeney at breakingthesilence.co.uk. That's David Beeney, B-E-E-N-E-Y, at breakingthesilence.co.uk. But Susie, we're now, can we see if there's any questions in chat, or if anyone wants to ask anything more specific that we haven't covered today?
Yes, David, thank you so much for a really just inspiring and uplifting presentation. We've had so many positive comments about your talk, and someone said it's the best webinar they've ever attended. So there you go.
Thank you. The check's in the post. The check's in the post.
Right, I'm just gonna, there are so many questions. I'm just gonna try and get through what I can, folks, and see where we get to. How would you suggest someone shares their mental health issue with their employee? Back to your earlier point, most employers would not be happy to hear about it.
I think it's never easy. Don't get me wrong. It really isn't easy, and it takes real courage the first time you do it. And you're also aware the first time you do it that there's no going back. However, this pandemic is presenting us with an opportunity. It's a crap time, but it is equally presenting us with an opportunity, because think about what I said earlier. It really is one in one. Every single person at the moment is going to go through some sort of mini crisis whatsoever, and some bigger than that during the next few months. So now is the best time ever to be honest, to share with someone that you're not in a great place. Now, when I talk about share your mental health, you don't have to share everything. You don't have to certainly do what I do, which is do it in front of huge audiences. But just sharing it to one person, and think in advance about what you're happy to say. But you may hold back. You don't have to tell them all straight away. And I talked about that, the language you use earlier. If you're talking to someone for the first time about how you're really feeling, to say to someone something like, someone asked me earlier today how I was out of 10. And do you know what? When I gave that some thought, I'm only 4. And I'd really love to get myself back up to even a 6 or 7 at the moment. You may find it's a nice way to open up that conversation. It's not easy, and there's no magic wand, but just accept at the moment that this is probably the best time ever and the most important time to really be honest about how you're feeling. And I know we overuse the phrase in the world of mental health that it's okay not to be okay, but it really is okay not to be okay. And one final thing on that, you'll find when you start sharing how you're really feeling, you will be amazed how often the person you're sharing that with will say to you, oh my God, I didn't realize that you suffered. I suffer exactly the same. At that point, you'll inspire them to share how they're feeling too. But it's not easy, Susie, but really that's the best advice I can give, I guess, this morning.
Oh, that's very good advice. We've had a few questions about panic attacks. How do you know you're having one? What does it feel like? What can you do to slow it down, prevent it, stop it?
Again, they're really unique to everyone. And so when I talk about my own panic attacks, I'm very aware that they won't sort of be the same as other people suffer. For me, as I said earlier, my way is actually allowing myself to have one. I spent years trying to be perfect, getting myself so tense, when the irony was, if I allowed myself to have one, then I don't have one. Now, I know that won't work for everybody. For some people, sometimes if they're really bad, you may need to contact a professional. You may need to speak to a GP. You may decide that you want to get some counselling, and a lot of you will have employee assistance programs. And dare I say it, there are some times when medication can really help and change your life. There's this stigma around taking medication, and people fear they're going to end up taking it for life. But the irony again, if you think about a diabetic has to take sometimes insulin for life, and there's no stigma around that. And sometimes if you need medication, that's okay too. I think what a lot of people advise around panic attacks is to try and focus on 5 different things going on in the room. And one of the great things about the internet these days, you can, if you Google about techniques for dealing with panic attacks, there are some brilliant videos on there. Just because, as I said, they're unique to everyone, and so just a combination of that, hopefully, Susie, might help some people listening today.
Yeah, thank you, David. Okay, so we've had a few about living alone and loneliness. How do I cope living alone with loneliness after 6 weeks in isolation? I FaceTime friends and family and walk every day, but I'm beginning to feel I'm drowning in the house with claustrophobia.
Again, I'm hearing that a lot, and hopefully these lockdown rules will change soon, because it must be really tough at the moment for some people living alone. And I know that social interaction is easier for some than others. For some of us, it's not as easy picking up the phone. We don't have, as many family. We don't have the ability to FaceTime or do Zoom. It's not an easy one. Generally, with people's well-being, one thing I did want to cover this morning that may help some of you, and that's about gratitude. A story I tell is that about 2 years ago, I'm generally quite a happy chappy, but I was feeling really sorry for myself. My dad was dying in hospital with Alzheimer's, and my mum was really poorly in hospital with pneumonia. And I just cancelled my main summer holiday because Lisa was really poorly. Plus, I felt guilty going away with my mum in hospital, obviously. So I rang Lisa up that morning, and I wanted her to wallow in my self-pity with me and feel really sorry for me. But she gave me a real kick up the backside, and she reminded me about how much good I had in my life. And when I first got off the call to her, I was a bit sort of peed off that she didn't agree with me, and that the fact she'd give me a bit of a kick. The following day, I was driving along the same road to see my mum in hospital again. And I remember being in a really good mood. And I remember thinking, this time yesterday, I was really down in the dumps, but today I'm in a really good mood. And I thought, what's changed? My dad's still in hospital. My dad's still in a care home. My mum's still in hospital. I'm still not going on holiday. And I realised that what had changed, I'd rediscovered gratitude. So what some of you may have generally with this time at the moment, because it really is a crappy time, let's be real about it. Some of you may literally want to write it down and keep something like a gratitude diary and write the really good things in your life. Others, you just may want to sort of just go through in your mind about all the good things in your life, because me rediscovering gratitude really showed me what a difference it made to my well-being within 24 hours. So certainly, for those of you listening today who haven't really thought, you're having a bad day, try and think of the really good things in your life at the moment. You may find that really gives you a pickup. As I said earlier about equally looking after yourself. If you are alone at home at the moment, try and give yourself things to look forward to. Things will change. Things are going to get better. We may not go back to a complete normal for some time, and perhaps in some ways it'd be a better normal with some of the things that we've all learned during this period. But try and give yourself some treats. Try and do things that are really good for you. But absolutely empathise with you, because it's not an easy time. I do get that. Thanks, Susie.
Thank you. What do you do when a friend who does have depression and is already taking medication for it, but this situation is making it worse? What can I say or do to help?
Again, just like in a non-pandemic time, they probably need to go back and review the strength of their medication. If they're already on medication, I'd certainly recommend that. I think we've got this almost perception at the moment that we can't go and deal with normal health issues in the normal way. And I think hospitals and doctors are now reporting that they're actually a lot quieter than normal, and that's really worrying them, because we all know that when you're in a bad place with your mental health, it can lead to other physical health issues coming on. And there's a view that this coronavirus is going to lead to, more other health issues coming along. So it's really important we still talk to a GP, we still talk to a counsellor, and we still get that normal support in the same way. So many people at the moment are cancelling hospital appointments or cancelling doctor's appointments because they're worried if they go into a hospital, they might get the coronavirus. I get that completely, but we've still got to look after the rest of our health at the moment in exactly the same way, if we can, as if we were, before the pandemic.
Thank you, David. Sorry, I'm just trying to go through all these questions. There's so many, it's great. How can we support our employees who need to take time off work to deal with their mental health whilst fulfilling the HR needs? I have experienced employees being under a lot of pressure as they've had a lot of time off and they've been receiving warnings about not having further time off, etc.
It's very difficult without knowing the specific HR guidelines there. I think you know what I'm going to say this morning. I think this is the time where you've got to say to an employee who's not in a great place that they need to take some time out. You're far more likely to get them back and get them working for you again if you do what's right by them at the moment and you try and trust, your employees. And it's not always easy, I'm sure, with certain individuals, but now is the time to just sort of be as kind as you can. It is really evidence-based that employers who during a crisis put their employees' well-being first, that you will come out the other side of this so much stronger with so much greater employee engagement and loyalty. So I think at the moment we have to accept that some employees are going to need some time out. Some employees, in their situation working from home, they may be in a situation where it's difficult to do more than 4 or 5 hours a day. Dare I say, even not as much as that. And we've just got to accept that. This is the toughest time we've ever faced for years and years and years. And the best way to keep people on side, the best way to get the best out of people is to be kind. And that phrase that's come into play in recent years, compassionate leadership. And I think it will be a time when we to reevaluate some of these HR policies and guidelines. They will need reviewing, I'm sure. But again, I can't be specific about that one, but I would certainly err on kindness.
Yeah, thank you very much. Here's an interesting one. Could you expand more about why vulnerability isn't a weakness? I know Brené Brown talks about it, but still the word itself is associated as a negative.
I've got, as I say, I kept quiet about mine for 36 years, being quite specific about it. And no one in my career up until that point had ever referred to me as being brave or courageous or inspirational. And it's been so humbling in recent years that I had no idea that the day I finally said, you know what, I'm going to really be honest about my panic attacks. One, I didn't realise how much it was going to help me as an individual by being kinder to myself and improve my own well-being. But I've just been amazed how many senior leaders I've worked with in recent years who've opened up to their teams and have really sort of just suddenly seen so much more engagement and motivation and courage from their own teams. I've seen so much evidence of. I saw a CEO recently. He shared with his team that he was currently having therapy and he was currently on medication and he wasn't in a good place. And he said to me after that day, his immediate team around him just seemed to go to a different level in terms of their support and their engagement and their willingness to work with him. There was a female CEO I was working with a couple of years ago, and she'd never shared the suicide of her sister who had died 20 years earlier. And she decided to share the story with her team. And she broke down in front of her team. And she'd never broken down or ever, her team had never seen her crying before. And you knew after that day, because a lot of the team cried with her, you knew after that day, one, she'd given permission for everyone in that company to talk more openly about their own mental well-being. I still know her 2 years on, and her business is absolutely thriving. Her position as CEO has never been as strong in that business. And she's seen as an inspirational leader. So it's just I've seen so much evidence of it, Susie. I can't name the person, but one CEO of a company every single person on this webinar would have heard of. he called me in recently and said to me, how far can you take your sharing your vulnerabilities? And we sat and we discussed it. And he shares on a regular basis his challenges. He's known as one of the most inspirational leaders in the UK. He's an amazing guy, and it's not doing him any harm. Trust me, trust me. I think this is quite a generational thing as well, Susie. I think it's quite generational. I think it is harder for some people who've lived a lot longer to accept that it's not weakness. And certainly we see, and I'm going to shut up in a minute, we certainly see in, because I haven't really talked about men on here today and how we lose so many more men to suicide and how men find it a lot more difficult to open up. But if you go into industries like construction, when we talk about the military services, it's still very difficult if you're in the army or if you work in a big building company as a man to admit that you're struggling. But they have the highest suicide rates. So we've just got to get better at talking about our mental well-being.
Thank you. I think that's probably a really good place to end, because I'm aware that time is creeping on. And yeah, thank you so much for all your wise words, and thank you everybody for contributing so much today, and with all your questions and comments. We really are grateful. It makes such a difference. A few of you have asked in the question box about getting a copy of this. Just to remind everybody, you will receive a recording of the webinar as you've experienced it today, and that you should receive that by email within 24 hours. So don't worry if you've missed anything. And then in a second, a brief evaluation form will pop up. It's really helpful for us if you wouldn't mind just filling it in. Thank you. That's really kind. And then finally, as you can see on your screen, the next in the series of This Can Happen webinars is on the 7th of May at 2 o'clock about nutrition for success, fear and uncertainty. So that's it really. So thank you, David. I don't know if you wanted to just say anything quickly, but otherwise, I was just going to say enjoy the rest of your afternoon and weekend, everybody.
No, just thank you, everyone. Today it's been a fantastic attendance, and yes, I should be on honeymoon, but if I wasn't on honeymoon, I can't think of a better place to have been this morning than talking to you lot. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David. I'm now going to end the webinar. Thank you, everybody.